this section is not for everybody, but this is for the person who specifically aspires to leadership at Hope Valley Church, spiritual leadership within the church. Now, we are really excited about empowering people to do the work of ministry in all kinds of ways, inside of the church and outside of the church, launching them off into career like in the business world. But some of us are called specifically to lead teams or to lead ministries and to serve in the service of leadership within Hope Valley or within the local church. And so this is for you. We've deliberately placed this at the end of this section because we believe it's impossible to adequately lead until you've already joined the community and you've already come alongside and served. And so in order to lead, those things already need to be in place. So I'll say that to you right off the top, that's our starting point for everything. And so I want to read this because we have a leadership kind of a matrix that we look at to help us identify people for leadership and so that you can kind of know what we're looking for and what being this kind of person does and doesn't do in terms of becoming a leader at Hope Valley.
That's great. Okay.
So leadership of Hope Valley starts and ends with service. It is a service of leadership. So the most important thing that you can do is to serve right off the top. We're passionate about sharing the work of ministry with one another and with everybody who's ready to serve alongside of us and helping you fulfill your call, the call of God on your life. So it won't take long for us to see your leadership capacity and ability, because leadership development is a passion of ours, and we're constantly looking for people who are interested. But this is the matrix. We are looking for men and women of faith. We are looking for people who are faithful, who are fruitful, who are available, who are teachable, and who are hungry.
That's great.
And each of those words could be its own video.
It could.
But I'll say that when it's specifically faithful, like being consistent in relationship, but also consistent in the work. For fruitful, I'd say that the fruit of the Spirit is evident and growing in your life. It doesn't mean that you're the fruit of the patience, kindness, love, long-suffering, like the fruit of the Spirit listed in Galatians, that those are present in your life, but also that people have benefited from you being in their life. Sometimes somebody will say, like, I want to be a pastor. And it's like, great. Well, who are you helping? Like, who are you helping in their walk with Jesus? And it's like, well, I just really like to study the word. Well, that's not being a pastor. It could be the beginnings of being a teacher, but really that's being a student.
Right.
And we should all be students, and that's exciting. If somebody finds a specific grace there, we want to celebrate that. But liking the word or wanting to serve doesn't mean that you're a pastor. In the same way that wanting to participate in the birthing of new churches doesn't mean that you would be necessarily the lead church planter.
Correct.
Right? But you could be a part of a church plant in many, many different ways.
Right.
And we hope to do those kinds of things. So fruit, we're looking for life fruit, and we're looking for ministry fruit. Available, just, I don't think I can describe that any more than the word is. Like it's available. Like, are you willing? Are you ready? Do you have space? I think do you have space in your life for the additional weight of service that leadership requires, for a late night phone call or for something else? This is not a glamorous invitation.
It's not.
So teachable, like people who want to lead, they bring something to the table. You've got skill or talent or ability. Maybe you were leading at a very high level in another environment, but we all need to remain teachable because we've all got room to grow and to continue to learn. And God's doing something distinct at Hope Valley that we can only do if we all remain teachable.
That's great.
Now, that's not, I'm included in that. Like, there's not like, I know everything as the lead pastor and I will teach and instruct you in all things. No, the Spirit of God is going to instruct us. Together we'll grow and move forward together as we all learn. And then hungry. Just, do you have an appetite for the things of God and for the growth and the benefit of other people? Now, some people are hungry, but for their own leadership or for their own position or title or something. Right. We're talking about, are you hungry for the things of God? Are you hungry for a move of God in the lives and the benefit of other people? So I've got one more thing that I want to say, and then I want you all to speak to the person who aspires to leadership. Getting on a leadership team or service team leader, small group leader, any of the ways that lead a classroom leader in elementary, an AVL team leader, like all the ways that leadership is available. It's not something that can be achieved through jumping through a series of hoops or checking off a series of boxes in any specific order or any order at all. Those boxes don't actually really exist. Now, to be ordained as a pastor, you need to finish Leadership 215, which is our 2-year kind of pre-Bible school leadership development curriculum. But it's really a theological training so that you can adequately engage culture and community with the gospel. Some people, here's what's, I think, the most awkward part about leadership is that some people will quickly be invited into a position of leadership, while some people, it'll tarry. And you'll see people it'll feel like they move past you.
Correct.
Right? We've seen this where I've been here and I've been serving. This person just showed up and now they're leading. Why not me?
Yeah.
That kind of thing will happen. But our goal is always, in every single situation, to do what is best for the person and best for the church. And those are oftentimes the same thing. We have a phrase that we use as a leadership team that we want to use ministry to build people, not people to build ministry. And so sometimes it's just a season of life thing. We see the weight that somebody's bearing, or sometimes it's a sanctification thing that, there's some things that that are getting worked out in somebody's soul. And quite honestly, just kind of bringing you behind the curtain, sometimes we don't even understand what the reason is. It's just kind of in praying and seeking God together. It's like, I think this is the right move. And it's a kind of a spiritually discerned decision that doesn't always make complete sense in the natural. And I know that can be a source of confusion, maybe even a source of frustration, but here's an opportunity to trust the leadership, and here's an opportunity to trust the community that you're a part of, and that we're going to be able to move forward together.
It's great.
Leadership in any environment is a stewardship and a privilege, and there's no right to lead, not even for me. Right? Like I already described that, the board could remove me. Every nation could remove me. Like, I don't have a right to leadership. It is a stewardship that God has given me, that has been affirmed by the hands of men and the men and women, the will of God and the affirmation of people. And that's the way all leadership works inside the church. Those who desire to lead will be held to a higher level of accountability.
Yes.
There are a number of verses that we look for, character traits and that sort of thing. Deuteronomy 1, 1 Timothy 3, Titus 1, Acts 6, and the model of humility in ministry found in most readily seen in the life and ministry of Jesus. All right, so with all of that said, for the person who aspires to leadership, I don't know if they really aspire to it anymore. They're like, gosh,
it is something you got to take.
What a
We do have to take seriously. So
yeah, so but it is something that we take seriously, and we're not always going to get it right, and sometimes we're going to get it wrong, and there'll be room to practice these Christian things that we've been talking about, of repentance and forgiveness and forbearance. But what advice would you have for the person who aspires to church leadership? Or if you want to answer a question of your own making, you can do that as well.
Go ahead.
After you say all of those things, now I have to jump in.
Yeah, now that's a lot. I mean, I think
I would say, for me, when I think about my own personal experience in leadership, I would say be content with whatever God is calling you to. So I tell people oftentimes about like leadership, and it's like, well, how did you get there? It's like, I didn't ask for this, right? This wasn't like,
depending on the day, you say
name.
that differently. Like, I didn't ask for this.
I didn't ask for this.
I don't want this.
I was content on serving on the connections team,
like
smiling at people and saying yes to people. And I tell people all the time, it's like, if God says, Andrew, I just want you to lead a small group, then I'm going to lead small group with all my heart.
Yeah.
If God says, Andrew, I want you to play saxophone on the worship team, I'm going to play the saxophone with all my heart.
I remember that. I saw a picture the other day.
So I'm going to play with all my heart.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be content with whatever God calls me to. And Paul talks about this. It's like, hey, if you're the foot, you don't have to try to pry and be the hand. Or if you are a shoulder, you don't have to try to pry and be the knee.
It's good.
Whatever he's calling us into, I believe that we should be content in that and serve it in the highest level. Now, as far as like my own personal journey, what this has looked like, it's looked like me serving. I've just really well served. All I've done is serve. And as I've served, God has said, I can use you. I'll use you over here. And I'll use you over here. And again, I keep going back to being content. It is really being content, whatever he wants to use me in that season. God does the calling, man does the affirming, and I mean man and woman. And so what other people see what God is doing in my life, then I get moved into that area, and it's like, hey, work in this space. And I'm like, okay, I'll work in this space for this time. And it's seasons as well. So called into this season to do this, and then I might be called in a season to do something else, and being okay with that as well.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
That's great. I think for me, it's that God holds the hearts of all men in his hands. And that if you feel, I think that to remember that if God is calling you or putting a tug on your heart that you might have a trajectory to be in some sort of leadership, that calls from him. And it's more important to focus on, well, what is God calling me to do to steward that than looking at, well, who's going to open the door? Where am I going to do it and when? But just recognizing it's a call from God. God will open door. When God opens the door, no man can shut it.
That's great.
And that if it looks like there's an obstacle, it might be from God. But God's calling you, so continue pursuing him, focus on him, and that way you don't end up pursuing leadership more than Jesus.
It's great. Wow. Love it. Love it. That's perfect.
That actually was that was surgical.
Yes, that's perfect.
I will say one last thought that pertains to leadership, but not directly to this conversation, that for the person who's watching this, there are going to be things that Hope Valley doesn't do. Right? So as a leader, God has given you a vision for something. And sometimes that's not something that Hope Valley is doing. But it doesn't mean that God hasn't called you to that.
That's great.
It also so it doesn't mean that you need to make Hope Valley do it. Now, if God puts something on your heart, you can, hey, I've got this thing I'm dreaming about, this thing I'm thinking about. There were some elders at Grace Covenant who started that's the church where we came from. They started a ministry, a microeconomic project in Zambia that equipped farmers to plant peanuts, and then they planted the peanuts, and then they sold them to a factory that was built as a part of the project, and then they made a peanut product that they sold to the NGO that went back to the community that they lived in.
Wow.
Because God had inspired them to do that work, and that work was important, and they were obedient to God, but it wasn't a grace, even though they were elders, it wasn't a Grace Covenant project. It was these men and women of God being obedient to the call of God to do the things that he'd called them to do, even while they walked together with Grace Covenant.
That's great.
That's great.
And I think that's one of the beautiful things about the church is that as we walk together, there'll be a unified but distinct call of God on all of our lives. And to point again to the mosaic that we talked about earlier, our broken efforts put together create a beautiful picture of the kingdom, and all of those together create a beautiful image of the body of Christ.
It's great.
So good.
So if you aspire to leadership, Paul says that you aspire a noble task.
Yes.
The task of leadership is distinct, it's important and significant, and but God and I think us in line with the heart of God are more interested with your spiritual health and the fullness of God's call on your life than we are about getting something done in the short term. And we thank you for the privilege of helping steward that call together.
It's great.
Leading.
Yes.
And then I'll just...
Oh, I thought you were starting the video like this, and I was like... I was like...
So,
yeah, I was like, this is a very different posture.